Hello, this is Dan, and this is my final project for educational psychology. My first question that I did at the beginning of the year is how do people process and store new information, and what factors can make it easier to store new ideas? And my original response was that information is stored through repeating and practicing learning that information. So I think that this is a good start, but repeating the information over and over again is one of the least effective methods of studying. And practice is important, but it's a vague, not specific term. And I also said the information is interacted with in different ways and applied in different contexts so that your brain remembers it. That is a core part of lesson design, is designing a lesson that is varied in its content and that just doesn't do one thing the entire time, and it switches between different activities. Um, but I didn't express that idea fully, but I kind of had some idea about it. Learning is helped by a relaxed environment with encouragement. I think encouragement is also a vague term. It could be if the encouragement is worthy and honest and is helpful feedback, then it's good. But sometimes blanket encouragement and just like saying, "Oh, great job," without being specific is not helpful. Um, a relaxed environment. I think an environment like that takes away unnecessary stressors is good, but a relaxed environment is kind of a vague terminology to use. Um, so I think I had some vague ideas about what makes about how humans process information, but I didn't have specifics. Um, so now to present my knowledge, we're going to talk about the multi-store memory model. So on this side, this is um, everything in the environment, and your sensory memory is using your five senses to um, sort of have a memory of that, and it only lasts a fraction of a second, and it captures like all the output around you, but most of it is going to be forgotten. You're going to forget the specifics pretty quickly after a fraction of a second. But things that you are paying attention to in this very moment, that is the short term memory or working memory. And that too will also be forgotten. And it only lasts about 20 to 30 seconds. And you can only think of about seven things at a time. So it is not that effective on its own at storing knowledge. So the long term memory, however, it can be um, things in the short term memory or working memory can get stored in the long term memory. And once they are stored, it's there's pretty much no limit to how long they're going to stay in there in your mind in your long term memory, and there's also no known limit of how much knowledge can be stored there. The reason we don't have infinite knowledge, and we don't remember everything that gets to our long term memory, is that sometimes the paths and the connections for things are not maintained. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of how we can get people to process information better? So, so we would want students to retain info in the long term memory. So to do that, so relearning the material, just straight up relearning it word for word is not an effective strategy. Um, it's not very deep processing. It's a very shallow form of interacting with the material. But once it gets to the long term memory, relearning the material is a lot faster. So that is a point. Spaced repetition, um, that is spreading the material out over time. That has proven to be effective in storing information in the long term memory, as opposed to massed uh, massed practice, studying for something all at once, cramming. You're not going to retain as much information. Priming, that is Priming is getting the um, students ready to learn by engaging in something similar to the material you're about to learn. Um, so something similar content wise that will get them thinking about the same topic, and it will make those connections sort of active in their brain, which will help them um, store things in the long term memory more effectively. Another thing we can do is give students expectations for learning in class, which can be done through presenting the lesson objectives and the standards that they may be based off of. Um, this is very important so that students know what to look for when they're trying to learn in the lesson. Um, Also, it's very important that we ensure that we know students' prior knowledge. This can be done through a formative assessment, but for the material to get through to the students, you need to know what they know before what you're building off of. Because if they have no prior knowledge on the material, it might just, float by them and they won't understand the material. Um, So important information should stick out in the lesson. So that should be visually, graphically, maybe through, emphasis verbally, but it should stick out in some way to make it easier for the students to spot it. Um, Also, another strategy is simultaneous active engagement activities. So, if we break that down, so simultaneous, so the entire class is doing it, and it's an activity that is active and engaging their brain in the material, such as think, pair, share, and splitting into groups and having them answer a question, put a post-it note on the board. So those are all good strategies to help students retain information in long-term memory. Also, chunking the information into manageable parts is very important because, as we talked about before, we don't really have that much that we can, you know, store in the short-term memory, the long-term memory, or it's the short-term and working memory. So we don't have that much space. So chunking it into manageable parts will help the students digest it. Um, Providing organizational support for students is also very important because organized students work more effectively. Um, so, also focusing on organization and meaning for students is very important because um, storing things in the long term memory is all about creating meaning with the information, and the semantic network of how your brain works. The network basically means that things in the long term memory are stored based on meaning, and they're large networks of things connected by their meaning and if they're related to each other. So, so if you focus on meaning and understand that, then you'll be an effective teacher and get things in the long term memory. Visuals and graphic organizers are also great to reduce the sort of cognitive load on students, um, and high level thinking as opposed to low level thinking. So you're doing high level thinking skills like comparison, analysis, and evaluation so that you deeply understand the material and you're not just interacting with it on the surface level, like memorizing, just repeating, reading it over and over again. So here, this is a good diagram for the working memory, and this is a reason why we should have variation in our lectures, is because um, we have the inner eye and the inner voice and inner ear, which are all part of the working memory. So if we have these resources available to us, we should engage them. We should engage the all parts of the working memory. So if we have like something visual and then you're talking at the same time, and you have like a whole host of different activities that have a lot of different skills, and so you interact with the material in a lot of different ways, and then it's more likely to be stored in long-term memory. So another question is, how can teachers motivate students to learn? So my original response was teachers can motivate their students by being encouraging and making students feel believed in. I think this is definitely important. And we're going to talk about how self efficacy is so important, but it has to be honest and has to be real. So you can't just give, you know, uh, blanket, everything's going to be fine if it's not. You have to give specific feedback about, their performance, and you should only encourage them if it honestly makes sense and you honestly assess that that's where they are. um, it is even more important that when students fail, they are treated with respect and are still encouraged to learn. Um, this is definitely true. I feel motivated when I'm interested in the topics being presented. So when the teacher presents concepts in an interesting way, it helps me grow. I think interest is definitely a big factor in student motivation. So I did identify that, but I kind of have like this shallow understanding at this point of motivation in education. So let's take a look at how my thinking's changed. So how can teachers motivate students to learn? Um, they can do this by maximizing intrinsic motivation. Um, so intrinsic motivation is um, intrinsic motivation is the student's own internal desire to do well in that class, and to do a particular task rather. Um, so being intrinsically motivated, um, compared to extrinsically motivated, which is when an external factor is motivating you to do a task. So intrinsic motivation sees students put forth more effort, more creativity. They persist more in the face of challenges, and they seek more challenging uh, work in their lessons. So it's also very important to avoid rewards, because they do take away from intrinsic motivation. Um, so, uh, an example of reward would be like saying "amazing job" to someone after they do something, or giving them some sort of reward, something they like some sort of treat. Um, because they will rely on that treat to do the thing. They will do the bare minimum required to get the reward. And it's not really about the task itself, it's about the reward. So making it about the task itself makes more effective learners. So um, trying specific and honest feedback, like I said before, in contrast to unfounded and general praise, like "amazing job." Um, so it's not good to say that when the praise is not based in a good performance, and it's just not specific. So the student has nothing to um, try to improve with next time. So saying your introduction was very strong because blah blah blah, because of why it was strong, is is more useful and effective for them, because it's giving specific feedback, something they can do better in the future, um, and it is giving like honest praise for good work that in reality is good. So um, another thing that can maximize intrinsic motivation in students is having student autonomy in learning. So um, the self-determination theory um, states that students have three psychological needs: the competence in what they're doing, or rather humans in general, competence in what they're doing, so feeling like they're being effective in what they're doing; autonomy, which is the degree to which they control what they're doing; and relatedness, which is relating to other people and having meaningful relationships with other people in the classroom. So building meaningful relationships with your students is very important, and allowing students to build meaningful relationships with each other through socializing, but even like working on things together, having partners discuss the problems out is a very effective strategy. And it also builds learning outside of the classroom. And like I said before, having autonomy in learning for students and taking away as much teacher control as possible, that's manageable, is positive for learning. And building self efficacy is also very important. Self efficacy is the belief of the student that they can accomplish a particular task. So this can be done through a variety of different ways, through language. Your language should be inviting and informative to the student, and it shouldn't be limiting and saying you have to do this, you have to do that. You should use words like should, suggest, available. Um, uh, um, Self efficacy also comes from experience. So the more that you do something and you succeed, the more you will feel like you will be able to succeed in the future. And it also depends on the emotional state the person is in. So, as much as possible, we should create a comfortable learning environment where all students are okay, and help them manage their anxiety, and give a space for them to talk about their problems. And then it's also very important to maximize motivation to communicate value and relevance of the goals. This can be done through giving like a rationale for why they're doing. Sorry. Uh, this could help by giving a rationale for why students are doing the things that they're doing, and also encourage students to have a mastery goal, um, other than a performance goal. So, an example of that, of communicating relevance first, would be in the teaching demonstration when the teacher kept referring to good mathematicians use this practice. So that's communicating that the task is valuable because people in society that are valuable are using um, these strategies. And a mastery goal would be emphasizing understanding all of the material rather than a specific performance. So if you emphasize, like, please just explain your thinking, just try your best, but don't focus on getting a grade, because like focusing on the grade can take away from your learning, and it can be in the back of your mind, and it will um, you know take away focus from the learning itself. So yeah. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Um, at the bottom, physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter. So these are our basic needs and safety needs. Those should be met first, before learning can happen. So you need to make sure your classroom is safe. It's a comfortable environment for them, and also that they feel respected, and they feel like they have a place in the classroom, and they feel accepted. So that goes back to helping students, giving them a place to express their problems. So that is also important in learning. So the next question is, what is your reaction to the statement all learners learn differently, and what does this bring to mind for you? So I talked about the idea of learning styles and that it's a myth. Some people say learn better visually from audio. Some people discredit learning styles. Um, so I discussed this with my friend, but like when I was first starting this class, and they had taken a similar class, so I already knew that learning styles were um, a myth. Um, but I did also point out the differences in some students, in the ways that they prefer to learn. Um, and there are patterns that everyone thinks something is hard, or people will find certain subjects easier or harder, because it's more interesting to them. Um, but I still did lack nuance in my or any like evidence for my opinions. So um, here, big takeaways: students are more alike than they are different in terms of how they learn. So most of the info about how students learn applies to all students. There aren't visual learners, auditory learners that learn differently. There aren't ways that we should like change the way we teach things for specific types of learners. However, it is like adjusting your teaching in the midst of a lesson and like reacting to how the students are performing is very important. Um, but specifically adhering to their specific differences is not important. So some things that apply to all students and can help um, all learners learn more effectively is multisensory input. So that's engaging all the parts of your working memory, all of your senses. Um, Visuals and graphic organizers, I've said that, like, again, those are very important in the um, taking away cognitive load from the students. Um, Pacing the lesson accordingly is very important. Chunking and also giving, we've been over chunking, and giving students thinking time is very important and can definitely help them and give them some tools to succeed. Um, I also did talk about space retrieval practice before. That is retrieval is a skill that is very important um, in comparison with relearning. Retrieval is when you are asked to recall something with no aid, without looking first, and that is very effective strategy for learning. So that does apply to everyone, but there are ways that students differ. Um, and they do differ in their prior knowledge, which means that you should be even more diligent in knowing what your students know, so that you're able to teach them effectively. Students also differ in the capacity of their working memory, um, and their current level of achievement in fundamental skills. So that means basic skills like writing. For a STEM field, it would be like doing math. Um, so those you can't really change the capacity of someone's working memory, but that doesn't mean that they're you know just because someone has a lower functioning working memory doesn't mean that they can still find a lot of success. Um, and also their current level of achievement in fundamental skills. Uh, as teachers, we can play a role in giving them more opportunities to be successful with these skills, and also how rapidly and independently they store and acquire more skills. Some people do it at a much faster rate than others, um, and also attitudes towards school and learning. So some of these are not able to be changed, but there are some things we can do generally. And something also that's very important is the social and emotional health of the students. So being there for students is very important, creating a comfortable environment where you can talk about your problems, because students may be going through traumatic situations. They may have experienced trauma before. Um, so, um, yeah, and specific ways that if students are struggling, that you can intervene, is called scaffolding. So uh, these are supports for students to kind of help them understand the material. So these some learning strategies, some scaffolding that you could use in a lesson. Thinking your thought process out loud is very helpful for students to kind of understand your thought process. Um, the gradual release model. So um, it's essentially you as the teacher demonstrate a skill, and then you help students, you do it with them. You first show them, then you do it with them, and then you let them do it themselves, so they get more and more comfortable with it every time. So um, by the end they will be comfortable with the material. um, Rubrics are a very good resource for students to understand what the expectations for them are, and frame statements help if students are struggling with the thought process for the material. They can kind of frame the students' thinking. Um, so, um, learning goals will still remain the same for students, but there are different ways to differentiate um, things in your lesson to help students in the moment in the class if they may be struggling. So first, you can differentiate the content, the process, the environment, and the product. So the content is just the material and the curriculum that the student, and it must be high quality. The process is just the how the student engages with the learning. So that's going to be all the planning that went into it. The environment is the climate, the tone of the classroom, and it should support learning. And the product is how students show understanding. So tier one, that's going to be your general, plan for your lesson. So, they provide high quality research based instructions. So this is going to work for most students. And then, if some students are having trouble, you can, you know, through a formative assessment, you could walk around and gauge where the students are in their learning. Um, and then intensive intervention is just one-on-one, um, you know, learning with students and talking with students so that you can help them. And then this is the zone of proximal development. So this is a good way to think about the difficulty of your lesson. So it should just be right in the middle, just right. This darker blue is what students can't do even if help is provided, and then light blue is what a student can do by themselves. So you should focus your lesson on the things that students can't do by themselves just yet, but can do with you helping. So that is the zone of proximal development. Um, and then to explain intelligence, this is why, even though some students may pick up on concepts much quicker, um, they can still succeed even if they don't pick up on concepts as fast. So fluid intelligence, that is fixed. That's your like capacity to reason, think, um, and pick up information. But crystallized intelligence is the intelligence that you already have, the knowledge that you already have in the long term memory, and it increases with age. It's only going to get higher the more you learn. So that can kind of make up for having less fluid intelligence. um, and it is possible for students with um, low levels of fluid intelligence to be very successful in the classroom. Um, so, so what are the characteristics or components of an effective lesson? So, my original answer was that a lesson is effective when it is clear in the way it is presented, and it needs to be paced well to keep the audience engaged. It is effective if it builds the student's skill in a topic, if it is interactive, and it helps keep the audience engaged. Um, I think that saying clear, um, it is good to be clear in your presentation of the lesson, but this is a vague statement. Um, I think a lesson being paced well is very important. So I think that is a good point. Um, and if it builds the student's skill in a topic, that is the result though. So that is an effective lesson, but it doesn't really describe how you get there. And if it is interactive, it helps keep the audience engaged. This is a very important point, that lessons should be engaging, interactive, but I still don't have a lot of detail at the beginning of the year at this point. So, so here are the characteristics and components of an effective lesson. So backwards design is very important. So first, you identify the desired results. So that should be the you should turn the learning standard into the lesson objective. And then you should determine acceptable evidence. Think about the formative assessments you're going to do, which is while the learning is happening, you assess how it's going and how they're taking it. And then the summative assessment, see what is the evidence that they understand the material. And then and then you plan the learning experience and instruction to help them be able to have the resources to succeed in giving you acceptable evidence, um, which, because it's acceptable and it's valid, it will help them um, achieve that result. So, what can help you get there is having clear learning objectives. A good format for them is the student will be able to blank, and then blank is a measurable verb, um, or a specific learning outcome. I already talked about formative versus summative assessments. So, formative is while the learning's taking place, and then summative is the assessment to test if you understand the material after you've learned it. So, a 7-step design, um, which helps sort of frame out a good lesson. At first, it's important to have an anticipatory set, which is an activity where all students are active and they're actively engaged in the activity, and it's engaging with their prior knowledge in a meaningful way, and it's also sparking student interest and um, helping the students see the relevance of the lesson. And um, again, stating the objective is very important, communicating its relevance and communicating the objective clearly. And then for the bulk of the lesson, the content, um, this is a sort of 3-step process. I do, we do, you do. So the teacher first models uh, the skill, so that the teacher just does it. Then the teacher guides the class through a practice problem and helps them do it along with the teacher. And then there's individualized practice where the student does it on their own. So this cycle can be repeated for every chunk of learning that should take place, and then at the end, when you're done with the lesson, there should be closure, which constitutes um, a meaningful rehearsal of everything that they've learned in the lesson. It can also have a check for understanding in the lesson, um, and it's also a part that requires active engagement. And independent practice is also very important. It did kind of blend into check for understanding, but independent practice is how students um, gain the skills to do things on their own. So this is a very useful graphic for understanding um, the how to um, how to come up with the measurable verb and the specific learning outcome for a lesson objective. Um, so you know, the more complex the lesson goal, the higher level of thinking that it is, and the more likely that the information will um, be retained in their long term memory. So the higher that um, the the sort of squares are, then the more useful it is for engaging with the long term memory. Um, so so at the beginning of the year, I said that um, I my goals for the course were I intend to learn how to be a better teacher and convey information to my students in a meaningful way. Um, I think this was a very vague and kind of unactionable um, goal, but I do think I have become a better teacher, and I have learned how to convey my information to teachers and to students in a more meaningful way, in a way that will engage with their long term memory more. And I've listed a lot of strategies that um, teachers can use and I will use in my future to help students understand material um, more meaningfully. But I do feel like this goal was kind of not well constructed. It wasn't very specific. So my goals for the next year of study. So I am taking an intro class to public policy, and I am declared a public policy major. So I would want to um, assess, if that's something that I want to keep doing because I've never taken a public policy class before. I want to design a schedule, and I did say schedule of extracurriculars, but it is my just general college schedule that makes time for exercise, self care, and time to do assignments because I struggled with that the first semester I did. I signed up for too many extracurriculars and I didn't have time to do other things. So that's a goal. And then I think I want to get some type of job or position activity that relates to the concentrations of study that I'm doing. So I've been doing a lot of extracurriculars that have to do with the arts, music, choir, technical theaters. That was the main area. So I want to do something that relates to what I'm going into. So those are specific in the terms that you can measure if I've accomplished them. Yeah, thank you.